guys, it's M4J here and welcome back to Global Ventures here on Planet Coaster. Last time out you saw me build the beginning of Bandito Escape the West, the rebuild of Bandito Escape the West. Today we are going to continue on with that build. So you see me there place the banana roll at the end of the launch track there. I didn't do a very good job last episode of explaining why an Infinity Coaster was a better choice than the Eurofighter, because I don't actually have a problem with Eurofighters, although I will say this saw the ride at Thorpe Park is probably one of the most uncomfortable rides that I've ridden on. It oscillates a lot. For those of you that don't know what that means, it's like as it travels along the track it sort of shifts from left to right quite a lot, so you kind of get thrown sideways instead of backwards and forwards like you normally would expect. So it's a bit of a weird, uncomfortable ride. Saw the ride. Maybe it's just because of its age now. Mind you, I've not ridden it for a few years. The last time I did was probably like 2014, and it wasn't a particularly smooth ride then, and it opened in 2009, so 5 years it had been open for. But anyway, I'm not going to moan about rides like that. Capacity is the answer to the question. A Eurofighter seats 8 guests in 2 rows of 4. Whereas the Infinity Coaster that I'm building here seats 4 rows of riders in rows of 4. So 16 riders instead of 8. So double the capacity. And with a ride like Bandito, it's going to be one of the signature attractions of the park. So actually having a higher capacity was crucial. So that's why that made sense. The Eurofighter style might have worked were it to be a smaller ride, but because it's quite a long ride in terms of its layout, you know, the launch, the lift hill, there's a couple of block breaks in between as well. It needed to have a high capacity. And actually, the ride itself, now that it's finished and it's testing and sort of the block sequences have been set up, it runs perfectly. Really, like fits with the throughput that I was aiming for. So it was a good choice. At the end of the day, it was a good choice. So here you can see me building the section after the launch. So there's the custom Immelman that I was talking about last episode that you saw me build there. This bit, the only forced bit that I wanted for this section of the ride, well, 2 forced sections. One, it had to line up with the clock tower for the brakes and the lift hill, and 2, I wanted it to fly through the clock tower still in the basement level. So as you can see, it goes through the launch, through the banana roll, under the path, up into the Immelman, which I might give a new name actually, because it's a bit like the Immelman at, which doesn't exist anymore, but the one that used to be on the red side of Dragon Challenge / Dueling Dragons at Islands of Adventure. It's that kind of inversion where it's almost like an inverted top hat that twists away on the downslope. But then we go into a 0G roll, which you can see me build now. And that lines you up perfectly with the tower. The one inconvenience, and I might try and cover it up, it might require a little bit of track reprofiling, but when I've built the lift hill structure, there's a big concrete block which I thought was part of the support structure, so I turned off supports for that bit of the ride, but the block remained. So there's this kind of ugly concrete block which is quite close to the track. I'm not sure if it's actually a health and safety hazard or whether we're going to be okay. But it's a little too close for my liking, so I might see if I can do something about that. The head clearance as well, it does look a little close when the trains fly through the clock tower. I have checked it a couple of times from various angles and it seems to be okay, so fingers crossed that is the case. But yeah, the interaction here with both Manic Miner, the railway, well actually Manic Miner, the railway, and the pathway is what's going on here. So that little floater hill over the path, I wanted to keep that in as well, because that was one of my favourite elements from the old Bandito, so I definitely wanted to include that in the new Bandito. Here you can see me building what was going to manually be an overbank turn, but I ended up using one of the pre-made ones, and again I'm quite happy with the outcome. I think I do swap it, I think either in next episode or the one after, I can't remember off the top of my head. But in this design it goes from right to left, whereas in the final design it goes from left to right. and I did move it slightly as well so that the supports were all in place. But I really liked the idea of having it fly over Manic Miner's maintenance shed, and actually sort of making a focal point for that bit of the park, because it's a really beautiful landscape when you look up into that mountain, and there's no real reason to look up at that mountain. But if there's a roller coaster sort of in the landscape as well, it gives people a reason to actually look up and see the scenery there, which I think is a nice, I think focal point is probably the right word. I'm trying to think of the artist's term, but I'm not much into art, so your guess is as good as mine. Then we rise up here into the block break. Now this was crucial. As I say, throughput was very important when it came to designing this new version of the ride. So I wanted to make sure that the throughput was as high as possible, which meant splitting the sections of the ride up into even-sized blocks. So I actually did some counting. Obviously you're watching this as a time-lapse, so everything looks sped up. But I counted how long it took the train to reach each block break, and made it so that each block was roughly the same size in terms of time. In terms of length, obviously the blocks get shorter as the ride goes on, because the momentum is lost, the ride gets slower. But for the first section of the ride, this bit here, this was kind of the datum. This set the benchmark as to how long all the other blocks should be. So it's the usual thing. Train enters the block. I think it slows it down to 20, 21 miles an hour, something like that. I did also check, because that was something else that was wrong with the old Bandito, is if the train had to stop on the block break for any reason, it didn't always clear the next block because it lost momentum. So I wanted to make sure that that wouldn't happen again, and I think I've done a reasonable job with that. And yeah, this is the bit coming out of the block break. So I wanted it to be like a slow meander into a hang time inversion. So you see me here, I'm building this little slow downwards right-hand curve, and then I think I build it manually again. You see I'm experimenting here with a heartline roll. Again, I'm not 100% sure on the clearance as to whether there is enough room on that 0G roll. If not, I think I can make it a little bit taller. Should be able to get away with that. But this is the double dive loop that I was talking about last episode. So you have a little drop there, and again you see me just experimenting with different elements. This is kind of my building style in Planet Coaster, is I look at all the different elements as I'm building and think, okay, if I can't build it here, where else in the ride could I potentially fit that element in? And I did do that quite a lot. So the vertical loop, you saw me have a look at it there briefly. I wanted there to be a vertical loop in this section. One of my least favourite things about B&M sit-down coasters, Dragon Khan and Incredible Hulk spring to mind immediately. Montu actually as well, the inverted coaster at Busch Gardens Tampa. I don't like vertical loops after block breaks on those rides. I always feel like with a B&M, the vertical loop is kind of it's either the first element or the second element. So Alpengeist at Busch Gardens Williamsburg is a really good example of a vertical loop being the second inversion. Banshee as well at Kings Island, although I'm not a huge fan of Banshee. I just feel like, for me, an inverted coaster is something like Nemesis, where your feet are very close to the ground. You feel like you're going to bash into the rocks as you go past them. I don't think at any point on Banshee do your feet come within 10 feet of the ground. It sort of negates the point of it being an inverted coaster. They may as well have just made it a flawless or a stand-up or a sit-down. But again, I have quite strong opinions on some American theme parks with how they, well, amusement parks, with how they build their rides, because they're clearly going for records rather than, you know, good theming. And I feel very fortunate to live in the UK, where we do have parks like Alton Towers where you can't build big and fast. You have to use the landscape to your advantage. So rides like Wicker Man, Nemesis, Galactica, Oblivion, Smiler, they're all built within the tree limit, which means you get some more interesting elements, I suppose is probably the right word. Like the Smiler holds the record for the most inversions of any roller coaster in the world. It's not the tallest, it's not the fastest, it's not the longest. Actually, it's quite long, but it's not the longest. It's just a coaster with lots of inversions. and you know, the top speed is quite low considering all the inversions are very low to the ground. Bandito isn't like that, I should say. As I said, the banana roll you do get quite high off the ground, but once you get into this second part of the ride, you are quite low to the ground as soon as you come out of the brakes. And I liked that. I wanted to use that as a strength to the ride. Plus it gives good interaction here with Manic Miner. This is a bit where I'm trying to build a vertical loop that encompassed Manic Miner's track here. There's a lot of landscaping that takes place shortly. And you can see I'm frantically trying to build a vertical loop with Manic Miner's track going through the middle. But no matter what I tried, it didn't want to play ball. Which is actually really annoying. So I came to a compromise of having like a half loop corkscrew type thing. And again, it's technically an Immelman, but I want to avoid having two elements exactly the same. So you could argue that one drops to the right after the inversion and the other drops to the left, or I might have to start coming up with new names for these inversions. So the big one after the banana roll, that I want to call something different, like a Bandito roll or something like that, because it's not an Immelman in the generic sense. There's a bit more to it than that. Here you can see me struggling trying to build this dive loop, and again it's a bit like the Immelman on Dragon Challenge. At no point really do you travel in a straight line during this inversion when it's finished. There's like a really weird twist and dive to it. I think you end up dropping down sideways and then you twist at the bottom. I think it's something like that. But yeah, as I said last episode, overall I'm really happy with the new design of Bandito. You will see, not next episode but the episode after, we rebuild the station and the show building. We also dig the tunnels. That was quite an important element of this ride, was making that work again. The only one I haven't done yet is the mine shaft at the bottom of the lift hill drop, mainly because of how daunting it's going to be to try and dig all that out, but also because the camera controls, I'm not particularly looking forward to working with it again. It's not the end of the world. I mean, I always have a go at the camera controls on this. They're not that bad really, in fairness. It's just a little irritating at times when you're underground, which you're technically not supposed to be. And I don't just mean like in a tunnel, I mean you glitch through the ground and then you try and zoom out and you end up 6 miles away from the park. That's kind of user error more than bad game design. But yeah, as I say, it's not ideal, but I just get on with it. I'll do that bit off camera anyway. But yeah, all the clearances have been checked. They hopefully are okay. I will have another quick check, probably on camera in a couple of episodes time. And besides that, it's a good intense ride. I actually want to load the game up very quickly just to see. Let me see if I can load it up on my laptop and talk whilst it's loading. How long have we got left in this episode? We've got about 10 minutes, that's fine. I should be able to launch the game in that time, I hope. I just want to check what the inversion count is. I also want to check what the top speed is, because I think it's 73. But I'm not 100% sure. Not 100% sure. Here you can see I'm building the manual inversion now. And it does get quite close to that launch track. I think I do move it away a little bit in a second, because I think I noticed, that might have been the point where I noticed, oh hang on, that's a little bit too close to the launch track. Because the launch track is the only thing that hasn't changed since this rebuild. Pretty much everything else has had a little tweak here or there just to make sure the clearances all work. Also, I know I mentioned this last episode, the support structure on that Bandito roll that I built, very nice. And that's not custom supports, that is in-game. Which again, like I said last episode, it kind of makes me a bit confused as to what everyone's upset about with the in-game supports, because they're really not that bad. I'm quite happy with them myself. I like the fact that on Crazy Taxi and on this ride, the supports actually join together if they're quite close. So it does look like this big integrated structure. And being an engineer, my ex-engineer, I'm quite a fan of sort of integrated structures like that. So I'm a big fan of how that's been set up. I think it looks really cool. Yeah, here you can see I'm starting to build where the vertical loop's going to go as well. So I know at this point that I need to move the dive loop just a little bit further over. This is almost like a stretched out corkscrew, the way it inverts, which might look a bit crazy when you see what design it has here, but in my head it makes sense. Hopefully it does on camera. Just the way like it does a full revolution. You start off on your right side up, you flip completely over. Yes, there's a drop halfway through, but it's kind of like if you took imagine a corkscrew is a paperclip and you stretch it out a little bit and then invert it slightly. That's kind of what I think of when I look at that. It starts off like a corkscrew as well. There's a really interesting, unique element. A lot of the elements on this ride are quite unique, and especially the Infinity Coaster in this game isn't over-the-shoulder restraints, it's a lap bar. So you're going to experience some unique forces when you're on this ride. This is me building the exit from the tunnel that's going to go under Manic Miner's tracks, and a nice little rollout. Again, it's custom made. When you look at it off-ride, it looks a little too tight and compact, but there's some real nice hang time there, and on the ride it actually looks quite smooth. So if it looks, normally it's the other way around, it looks smooth off-ride and it looks a bit janky on-ride. So for it to look smooth on-ride, that's all I need. I'm happy from then on. I was trying to think of an example that uses a rollout a bit like this. A lot of Gerstlauer coasters do have quite unusual shaped exits to Heartline rolls and things like that, particularly ones that Intamin as well do it. Any Heartline roll or barrel roll or inline twist that starts on an banked curve, they always have this kind of weird entry shape to them. Colossus at Thorpe Park springs to mind. There are a couple of other examples here and there. Alright, it's loaded up on my laptop. I just want to see how many inversions we have. It is 14. 14 inversions, an airtime count of 6, total airtime duration 3.8 seconds. I do dispute that slightly. I'm not sure how it counts it. Maximum speed is 78 miles an hour. And actually that might be from the bottom of the lift hill drop, which you can see we're getting very close to building now. As I said, the lift hill has been lined up as close as possible to the building here. I did have to move the building slightly. I think I moved it slightly to the left in the direction we're looking at now, just so that it lined up correctly with the lift hill. And I add, oh yeah, that was the other thing. The lift hill is now taller than it used to be, which means the drop into the mine shaft is also taller than it used to be. So it's a real focal point. Weenie is the word most people would use. It's a landmark for the park, which I've said that before in this series. You can stand anywhere in the park pretty much and see the clock tower for Bandito. So yeah, it's taller. I can't remember how much by. I think it's like 6 or 7 meters taller, I think, give or take. I'm just watching the coaster go around now as I'm talking about it, which is really cool. There are a couple of tweaks that have taken place, like I said. The main one being the overbank turn that goes over the railway station. That's been made mirrored. That's the word I was looking for. That's been mirrored, like I said earlier. The clock tower's a little bit taller. The drop's a little bit taller. The block break and the entrance to the first dive loop above the clock tower, that's also been moved, because as you saw just there, when I placed the track to go into the clock tower, it removed the main support structure from that block break, so that's been tweaked slightly as well. And here I am building the entrance to the tunnel. Now I put some lights up in the tunnel so I could see a little clearer. You'll see me do it in just a second, I believe, because it was dark, and I tried to turn auto tunnel on just to make it manually dig it out, but I think because of the path directly above, it wasn't doing it. It wouldn't let me auto tunnel. Either that or because I was already underground and I tried to turn on auto tunnel. Can't speak. So I just lit up the tunnel and tried to line it up as best as I could. We do have a new exit to the tunnel as well. It's in the same place, but it used to be, I think it was an Immelmann with a rollout, whereas now it's an Immelmann with a corkscrew. and then that leads into like a flying snake dive type inversion, and then a very heavily overbanked curve. And then currently there's a cutback as the last inversion of the ride. I'm actually tempted, now I know that it is 14 inversions, I'm tempted to turn it into like a twisted horseshoe and have it be 15 inversions instead, and actually go for the record. We'll have to see about that. But the back end of the ride is a lot bigger than it used to be, and a lot longer than it used to be, and as a result of that, I have added an extra block brake to the back end of the ride as well. By back end I mean behind the bank building itself, so the section that we're just coming up to in a second. There's me adding the lights, so you can now see quite nicely what the inside of the tunnel looks like. The scenery in here, like the little mine shaft with the lamps and things like that, that will all get moved and changed in order to fit the new track profile. I wasn't too fussed about it at the time, and even on the POVs there's only a couple really that need to be changed, because we end up, not only is the drop taller in terms of the clock tower height, I think the track here also goes down lower than the old one used to. So you can see here the track's actually going through the floor, which it didn't used to do. So that was quite interesting to see. The test results for this ride, by the way, I don't know whether they're good or not. It's 5.0 for excitement, 3.44 for fear, and 1.54 for nausea. So I think the excitement could come up a little bit, but I don't actually know what you have to do in this game to get excitement up. I'm not that sure right now. So perhaps someone in the comments on Reddit can tell me. But yeah, you can see I'm building the Immelman out now. And that is actually the end of the video, believe it or not. I'm going to have to stretch this video in order to make it fit the commentary. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed the video, and of course if you're enjoying the series, drop some comments down below on Reddit with ideas, feedback, all that kind of good stuff. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, be sure to hit the subscribe button. If you have already subscribed to the channel, thank you guys for your continued support, and until next time, I will see you soon.